Hey Peyton, nice to see you again on this beautiful day. And this time with a quote by our friend Richard Feynman, where he says, "Study hard what interests you most in the most undisciplined, irreverent, and original manner possible." How do you relate to that? And what are you studying in an undisciplined and original manner?
Good to be back. I love the irreverence of Richard Feynman in his own ways of learning and in his life. I think he's one of the most interesting minds that we've ever got a chance to kind of peek into through his writings, through his teachings, through how he lived. And for him, how this looked with physics was these crazy experiments using these actual objects that were in front of him. And his way of teaching was physics really brought the hyper abstract into something much more tangible. So he would say something like a proton in a hydrogen atom compared to the space that the electron takes up is like an apple compared to the space of the earth. And then you can feel those orders of magnitude so much more clearly. And he also his Nobel Prize winning discovery was, man, trying to remember the exact experiment, but it was something crazy like he had this insight with how plates spun or how something was in a pan or something like this, where he had this unlock into this really hard and breakthrough physics problem from this totally irreverent way of going about it. And he famously just did not take himself too seriously. Do you have the experiment?
Well, not the experiment, but I remember from his book, You Joking, Mr. Feynman, or whatever, he described where he saw a student in the Mensa throwing a plate, and the plate had a wobble. And he was like thinking, oh, interesting. Why does it wobble? And how fast is the wobble compared to the speed of the rotation of the plate? And he found out it was like 2 times the speed of the rotation of the plate, the wobble it turned out, but I haven't figured the experiment. Did you find it?
Yeah, it is the plate story. It was, he could see a plate spinning while also wobbling. He noticed it had a ratio. He started working out the physics just for fun, and then he got back into the math. It reminded him of electrons and quantum theory, and it put him in the work that became his version of QED Feynman diagrams, the path integral intuition to
Quantum
calculate particle
electrodynamics.
interactions in a new way. So
Wow.
that's pretty awesome. Very irreverent, very original. And his whole life is a story of just this curiosity driving his learning in a very renewable way. He had such an enjoyable life, even as a physicist, that we would associate with hardcore seriousness. Even when one story I love is when he was working on the Manhattan Project, this like most hyper hardcore security lockdown thing of all time, he got into safecracking. And so with
Yeah.
these other physicists, with these like hardcore nuclear codes where there's probably like watching out for Soviet spies and
Yeah.
Nazi spies or whatever, he got into safecracking and he would like crack the safes of Oppenheimer in his room and just leave like a joke sticky note inside of his safe. And he did that to like all these physicists working on the Manhattan Project for the atomic bomb, which is hilarious irreverence. And I can't believe he didn't pay any consequences for doing this.
Well, the one time he cracked the safe of the commander in the commander, he cracked the safe and said, "Look how easy it is to crack the safe. And it's not so safe to crack the safe. You probably should like exchange the safe." And the commander was like, just later in his notes, it would be found that this is not safe. We need to lock him down somehow. Instead of like systemic change, it's like him. He's the unsafe character in the minds of the military guys. So how he did it, if I remember it correctly, was like the first number he would like the most people would leave the safe open because when they were talking and so on, only when they would leave, they would close the safe. So how he did it was like he would engage in conversations with the guys, and because the safe was open, he could like play around with the thing, and he would just like play around, and they didn't realize it. But secretly, he would like figure out the number where it clicked, so he knew, and then it reduced the amount of possible combinations because he knew the number per save. It would reduce the amount of possible combinations per save, so that he just could apply statistics.
Hilarious. Hilarious. He also, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, at some points he was working on his physics theorems while just chilling in topless bars. I think he also
Yes.
joined some like marching band in Rio and all this crazy stuff. He's a hilarious person. What can we learn from him? I think seeing his example, we can learn a way of being of playfulness while also performing at a very high level. I think the question of working on what interests us most and then doing it in the most unstructured, undisciplined, whatever way. I think this is the key. This is actually a real insight. This isn't just a personality quirk of his only that's inapplicable to others. And it wasn't just detracting from what otherwise could have been a greater genius. Rather, this is what gave his curiosity for physics such a renewable resource. And I think this is the core of what this unlocks for us when we focus on what interests us the absolute most, and then we do it just in our own way, not trying to impress anybody by how many books I'm reading or what their titles are, not trying to impress anybody by what classes I've taken or what credentials I have, not trying to do anything for extrinsic rewards. Only intrinsic rewards, only what motivates me, only what tickles my curiosity. Nothing where I can brag to other people about what are all the boxes I've checked off, about how many books I've read and who I've studied from and how credentialed I am, and none of this. Rather, just do what's the most effective, do what draws our curiosity next, and follow rather than demand and strictly lead ourselves. This is going to be what creates the possibility for truly going deep with sustainable, renewable energy and curiosity. So, for me, for example, recently, the two things that I've really dived into like this. One is the Aramaic language. I've just found it so fascinating, so interesting, yada yada, but I haven't taken courses to learn it. I've learned it primarily with AI. I've learned it piecemeal. I've learned it by saying, "Oh, I wonder what this verse that Jesus spoke originally meant." And, "Oh, I wonder what the nuance of this word is and where else it shows up." And there's only this many roots. I wonder how this root shows up in other places. Oh, I wonder how it was felt. Oh, I wonder this. I wonder that. I wonder how the physical substrate of the human body actually ties and unifies this whole system of meaning and understanding. And oh, I wonder if I can practice this. And then I go to this YouTube video and then I memorize this. And then I learn these vocabularies because this is the topic that interests me. And I want to get a sense of this and blah, blah, blah. None of it felt like work to actually obtain what ended up being much, much, much more knowledge than I would have received from 20 books and 5 courses. And yet it felt easy. It felt effortless. It felt renewable. It didn't feel like I was a slave driver for myself. The other example is learning to vibe code and learning computer
Mm.
science. I started off with a few projects that I just really wanted to do. I really had this vision for a local infrastructure set up on this new computer and figuring out how to use RAG databases and local LLMs and set up this offline intelligence and understand therefore how hardware works and sort of actually have to pick up some first principles of computer science in order to accomplish this goals by going super deep on something that genuinely I was so curious about. I really wanted to do this. I really was passionate. Like even if nobody would have ever known that I was doing this, even if I would have built it and then thrown it away, I was still so curious, so interested in this. And another for a few personal websites of me. And now actually there's a project I'm working on of a whole scale translation from Aramaic to English by using this combination of computer science, software development, RAG databases, and different systems architecture with my passion for language and nuance and sense and translation methodologies and ancient texts and a lot of the stuff that I've incorporated there. And so this project too feels renewable. Like I can't put it down because I want to keep iterating on this aspect. And oh, I need to build out how I can integrate a source that really captures this angle of nuance on how these languages bounce off each other and how to capture it when rendered into the English, etc. So these are the types of things where because I love to do it and I'm not forcing myself to do it and I do it when I'm drawn to and I never I never am a drill instructor. I just open and allow myself to follow the curiosity that I am really passionate about right now. Then these projects can be like if I was slave driving myself for a year, I probably wouldn't have gotten as hard as just following the renewable energy, following the flow, letting the flow move, letting the flow bring me to where it wants to. it's just such better fruit, and it's way more fun, and
Yeah.
it can give me energy rather than taking away my life force. How do you experience this? What's kind of the things that you're being irreverent and undisciplined about that you love to learn and do?
I love, for example, exploring books. I love to explore concepts. And with that, I see the capabilities which we have now to use the algorithmic jump start in terms of cutting through the chase and directly like a surgeon cutting through the point of highest interest. And I just love to, for example, using these semantic tools where they just give you all the topics, and then you open the topic and you see all the subtopics, and then you ask the system to explore exactly this subtopic with you, and then you can chat with it and so on. So I just love to interact like this. And as well, vibe coding. It's so much fun to iterate on your vision and see something become real while you actually create something. It is like stuff which looks like work and previously has been a lot of work, but now is just fun. Fun to do because it's like one, it's like this alignment of slot machine mechanics with creation and creativity, where you just can realize projects which you had in mind for years but couldn't like bring down to earth, either because it was not economically viable or just the skills weren't available just like that for us. Now with AI, it's just like that, that we can apply this intelligence. We can just like use it to bring our vision into software reality and even hardware realities if you have a 3D printer. So this is, I guess, what David Deutsch calls the fun criterion. He also claims that most of the biggest leaps for humanity and the biggest pieces of knowledge creation happened because the people who created that knowledge just dove into the topics just for the fun and for the sake of itself. They had fun doing it. They had just means to play around with it. They had the brain and the mind to do it. For sure, you need a unique kind of brain to discover something like Einstein. You need to be at the right spot at the right time. And there's only a few constellations of people, place, time, zeitgeist, and capabilities to let that emerge, what is at the adjacent possible, what is at the cutting edge of what is possible. But therefore, like you said, is a renewable energy for you. If you do it for the sake of the fun of doing it, then it's probably the right path. That's the right thing to do. You don't need to slave drive yourself. You don't need to like have discipline and discipline yourself and so on. You just do it for the sake of it. And that's why also Naval, who's also very influenced by the philosophies of David Deutsch, he says, figure out something which looks like work to others but feels like play to you, and just do that. And now that we can just jump ahead using the algorithms and using software 3.0 to support this and to support our curiosity, I think this will lead to, in combination, human and machine, to a knowledge creation explosion, to projects which will be really helpful when they get open source or whatever, and other people can combine because they needed to let in a lot of tokens, a lot of creativity, a lot of intelligence, like Peter Steinberger or News Research, creating now the new operating system platform of agentic harnesses. Where you just can chat with it via chatbot, and then it uses your computer, and you can have just employees, so to say, who do knowledge work for you at the cost of hardware and a little bit maintenance and energy. I think we are in such a great time for this aspect of exploring our creativity, our own uniqueness, so to say, our ways of thinking, exploring, playing, which are most fun to us, to ourselves. And that goes in hand with what Peter Drucker says. Don't waste any time to go from bad to mediocre. Just leverage what you're already great at and become even more excellent at it. And that's where you can have the biggest contribution uh, to your life, to the organization, to society as a whole. Peyton, why do you think can we leverage our strength, and how can we explore our contribution better? And how do you do that besides the translation project, which is really great?
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to the outcome of it.
Me too. Me too. I think that a part of it, it's like we have to get better at the skill of listening and following is something that seems to be behind us. There's this element of flow that we've talked about many times where it really does bear 5 times the fruits, and they're way better fruits than anything that we can slave drive ourselves into making, than anything that we can struggle our way into. However, it doesn't obey our slave driving. Like flow doesn't like wait around for orders and just strictly follow and stay within the lines. Flow needs spaciousness. Flow needs the trust for us to give ourselves to wherever it wants to go in this moment. And so there's some amount of practicing that and listening and following. And I think that for me, it starts a lot of times with walking in nature. Just if I want to cultivate this capacity in my mind, if I want to follow my curiosity, walking in nature, it just helps my mind to envision new possibilities. It helps new creativity to dawn on me. It helps curiosity to emerge and then cultivate. And then I think of this question, and then I want to explore this, and then I want to know more about this, and I have some idea or inspiration to create this thing or to solve this problem in this nonlinear way. And so that for me, the walking element is much better than just sitting in nature. And the nature element is better than just walking in a city block by a lot. And so for me personally, just very practically, this is huge. I also think that just the the sort of spiritual state of our mind, are we in a state of baseline wholeness? And wholeness kind of being synonymous with baseline presence, baseline awareness, baseline abiding and dwelling in the now, versus am I constantly trying to control the future in some way? When I'm trying to control the future, I do tend to cut off the flow. And so these seem to be upstream, and flow and curiosity are very related, in my opinion. Flow and effortless exploration of creating new stuff and kind of observing what you're creating while you're creating and learning how you're building it on the way to building it. This is all interconnected, in my opinion. So I think it has a lot to do with our minds habits, and therefore our body minds habits, in our environment and our fixations or looseness within our mind, our state, so to speak. What else do you think about if we want to have this, if we want to have the spark of inspiration and then the capacity to follow it, to have this, find what we're most curious about and irreverently, undisciplinedly follow it and enjoy the fruits? How?
How? I think it is about play, playfulness.
Mm,
It is
mm,
with play that kittens learn how to hunt. It is with play that chickens learn how to find the bugs to eat. It is with play that we learn how to have motorics and move in the world, and how the world works, how the things work. It is about the iteration loop of trying something, failing, trying again and learning from it and doing it better. It is always the agility comes from seeing something, understanding something, acting on something, and then seeing on the results of something. So the playfulness we should never lose. That's why also Jesus says that we become like children again, because as grown-ups we tend to be so rigid. We tend to be in our thinking structures, and we tend to be in our modes of operations and having our habits and our ways of knowing that the world works without actually maybe being right. Doesn't matter. But the open-mindedness about how things work, what else could work, and the playfulness to have the humility and the openness to interact with stuff. And this opens up the realm of actually learning, actually exploring what is there that we are most curious about. And second, I think it's not it is a thing when people have shower thoughts, because they don't grasp on it. They don't like they don't have it tight. They don't have a tight vision. They have a loosely held idea. Maybe it's in the back of their minds again, but as soon as the system relaxes and as soon as you let go everything, the ideas tend to interact in a latent space and then bubble up into conscious awareness. And that's how you have these shower thoughts, which are genius ideas, which you want to build upon. And the same thing applied to me yesterday. It's not a genius idea, no, but it was definitely a thought when I was in the pool having like this water stream massage my back. And I was like, got it. Instantly went home, spun up Cloud Code, used
Nice.
Fable 5 to implement the idea, and it turned out well.
Rest in peace, Fable 5. I think that with play too, how do we how do we be in a state of play? A core part of it is what we're not doing, is the via negativa. I think if we have specific demands that this next 30 minutes yields some specific outcome, then we can't play. If we have demands on what exactly will come next and a rigid set structure for this step, then this step, then this step, and it has to be right and it has to happen on my timeline and has to happen in my way, then we're not playing. And if we are demanding, controlling, we're too rigid to flow and to bend. And I think that play is if we're in a state of play, therefore we are not in a state of clamping down and just squeezing, choking off the flow. Yeah. I think that the other part here is truly following when it hits. It's like when inspiration really strikes, if we actually let it flow through us for the next 2 hours as we are kind of diving into this and that, it can just we can really ride a wave, and those waves that we ride when it strikes, when we give ourselves to it, it can be so much better than if we cut it off after 15 minutes and hope that it strikes again tomorrow when it won't, perhaps. And so I think following when it hits, when we see that we're in the zone, letting the zone play out. This is, I think, a part of awareness. Take advantage when we have an opportunity like this. And don't demand any outcomes. I think that so much of, like, for example, when Steve Jobs took a calligraphy class in college and it taught him about design that ended up making the iPhone so successful decades later, he wasn't
Mhm.
looking at an extrinsic reward from everything he was doing. In my own life, I find that the most useful skills that I've picked up recently did not have an extrinsic reward when I was going about them. So loosening our demands, that everything that we already see what this is going to do for us and that this is going to give us some specific thing that we want in advance, and we're demanding that we know the outcome in advance. I think this loosening that can open up possibilities for play and for synchronicities and for interesting, unforeseen, unique, and valuable combinations that may arrive unexpectedly even years later.
There's also a saying attributed to Einstein where he says it seems like the basis for genius is playful combinatory play. If you have like combinations of stuff which you're interested in and play around with them, and then you don't need to have a yield, but sometimes it yields something which is unexpected and very beautiful, and then combinatory play leads to the great discoveries. And I really like that attitude of combining and having then something which contributes to the greater good, to society as a whole. For example, one of my professors, Professor Brandenburger, who developed the MP3 coding, people have heard of that. It could like compress wave data seemingly without loss in X or 10x the size, which opened up file sharing via the internet, where the bandwidth at the beginning of the internet wasn't so wide. So, and he explained to us the same thing. You just need to combine the stuff which you already know. You need to combine stuff. And he combined psychoacoustic discoveries, where he measured at which frequency in the hearing frequency range of the human, which pressure needs to be applied to have the same kind of felt intensity. And then you discovered this curve where you have the highest felt intensity, where you need the lowest pressure at 1 to 2 kilohertz, which is curiously also the sounds where baby screams in. So it is evolutionary, came like this probably Also because you have the resonance frequency of your hearing channel in that kind of distance where you don't need much pressure to really be sensitive to the sounds. So, and then he cut away all these unhearable sounds which are not hearable but recorded in a wave. And then he combined mathematics with it. He like added Merkle tree analysis, and then like a histogram effort where he took the the most amount of a letter, but yeah, frequency in this case, and then reduce the complexity of it. Said instead of www, said 5 times W, which reduces the complexity. So combining all these things in a coding where you have a compressed format, but still seemingly a lossless for the human ear experience of the same kind of music. This is only possible because he was like studying electrical engineering and mathematics at the same time, and combining the concepts and his curiosity and his love for music with that, yielding something very beneficial for our society, on top of which other people build up their audio coding efforts. And now we have so many more varieties of it. Now we have AI being able to compress a seemingly lossless X compared to MP3 or the best audio coder format. So it's 100x improvement of lossless, seemingly lossless audio consumption. Yeah. And it's just amazing what the human mind can do if it's playfully combining his highest interests without the need to yield something from it. But yeah, maybe a yield, like you may apply a forcing function to it. You may apply a deadline to it. And then you have Parkinson's law. The seeming complexity of a task expands to the amount you have time for its completion. So if we need to deliver tomorrow, we for sure simplify our task. We for sure don't add to so much detail. But as we said in our previous conversation, that the deeper you dive into the details, the more time you can spend to make the details right. It's like a multifractal approach.
Yeah.
So you definitely simplify your problems, and still, when you apply the 20-80 principle, Pareto principle, you still get to a really good point. Not to the highest point of the potential you could like get to, but definitely forcing function is also applicable if you have the means to playfully simplify whatever there is you need to do, whatever
Mm.
the outcome is you want to reach. And then it's also possible. How would you take in forcing functions as well into playfulness? Because sometimes it's competition as well that
Yeah.
is play.
Yeah, I do think that just paying attention to what are the effects, it might be that certain times in our life, a forcing function is really helpful because I would say it helps force us get something out into daylight and actually shipping something live to where it's useful out there. This is where it can get real feedback and we can actually see the big picture of where the vision isn't lining up to reality. And so having this bias for shipping, this bias for making something real in front of us as opposed to keeping it locked in a lab where it's not getting exposed to daylight. This is an important bias because things need to be iterated with their actual real world integration in mind. Whatever it is, if we want to create something beautiful or useful or fun or whatever, reality helps. Reality helps steer the ship really well. The other thing that I'll highlight that's kind of underneath what you shared is this bias for learning by doing is a really useful bias, a really useful razor. We just learn so much better, so much realer, so much more usefully when we learn by actually getting our hands into whatever it is and not just passively absorbing what it is. And so that's kind of the last thing I would say about learning irreverently. A part of me learning Spanish irreverently was talking to strangers before I could even understand what I was saying or before I could even make good sentences. And a part of learning undisciplined is by doing something before you're ready for it. Me building a first website before I even knew how to download Cloud Code and opened up a terminal. This is
Nice.
undisciplined, irreverent, get the things mixed up, just do whatever you feel like. And in the bias for real worldness, action, deploying, making the vision an actual version 1, an ugly, stupid MVP, this helps us to actually get much more knowledge much faster faster, much more traction, and make something much better that's steered better. So that's how I think the Pareto principle, or the bias for Parkinson's law, applies, is like, don't let something just bake and cook in the darkness for months before it gets reality, because you might find that as soon as it hits daylight, 50% of it needs thrown away, and you realize you're missing the 50% that's the most important thing, but you can't really see that a lot of times until it becomes a thing in front of you.
Mhm.
Anyways, any kind of, out of all of this, the irreverent learning, the possibilities, all the ways to cultivate, what would you say are your core intentions for the week to come as it relates to this web of concepts related to exploring our curiosity and pouring the renewable energy on the fire?
My intentions is a little bit deviating from Richard Feynman's undisciplined manner, because he had the luxury of doing it as a researcher in a university. He didn't have the forcing function of the economics need to
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
So my intention is to be playful, but in a frame, in a focused manner, to the points where I know the highest potential is there to yield something off of it, with at the same time, possibility to create something which is very fun to create. So actually doing something useful and something fun, and focusing on doing it. This is my intention for next week. What about you?
For me, I have to say it has to do with the playfulness and the fun element. If I'm looking back at the last week, there's a handful of things that I really enjoyed working on, especially the new softwares that I'm building. I just really love software engineering and systems architecture and vibe coding and that type of thing. But I didn't have a playful spirit, honestly, this week. If I'm looking back, I was kind of worried about a lot of stuff. My mind was fractured. I was thinking about how I wanted certain things to happen or not happen in the future. I was thinking about what the outcomes would be and what I need to happen and all this stuff and what I want and don't want. And I cut myself off from a spirit of playfulness, if I'm being honest. And so I think cultivating this spirit, even amidst difficult circumstances, even when I need to be at peak performance, let me still have this way of being, or cultivate at least this way of being, even if I can't hold on to it, honor it and cherish it and treat it as an end in itself, and trust that there is a lot of value that comes from this way of being. It helps me to align myself. It helps me to unify my whole intelligence. It helps me to see possibilities for nonlinear unlocks, for eureka moments, for insights, for inspiration, for creativity that actually can serve me far more than a rigid, hardline sort of drill instructor in a divided inner mind. More than anything, I want to unify my mind, and I think that honoring playfulness is a helpful first step. And I'll probably do some good dancing in the coming couple of days, some good
Nice.
nature walks, some good curious exploration of what I see in nature, and just doing things intrinsically motivated. I think this is an intention that I have out of this.
Awesome, man. Thank you for this conversation. I appreciate you, man. Let's play
Likewise, my
around
friend. I
with
enjoyed
stuff.
it. I will see you on the next one.
See you soon. Bye.